Thank you, Alexis. Hi, everyone. Welcome, everybody, to the webinar. We're all very excited to have you all join us today for this webinar, and we thank you for your interest. We're looking forward to learning about what our speakers have for us today and regarding H5N1 and developing successful partnerships. We're also looking forward to you all taking part in our discussion portion of this webinar. So with that, let's get started. Let's go to the next slide, please. So just some brief NCFH history. For those who may not be familiar with NCFH, we're a private nonprofit organization located outside of Austin, Texas. We're in Buda, Texas, specifically, and our mission has been to improve the health of farm worker families, and we do that by providing programs, trainings, and technical assistance and resources. We're actually coming up on our 50th anniversary, so we're very proud of being able to serve the 174 migrant and community health centers in our network, who provide primary care services to agricultural worker families. Next.
Thank you, Carlos. Good morning or good afternoon, wherever you may be joining us from. I'd like to welcome you as well to this training, and thank you for taking the time out of your day. If you are like me, it's awful pretty outside, so we definitely appreciate you coming in out of the sunshine and joining us today. I'm Tina Horn. I'm the One Health Excite H5N1 Dairy Specialist. And I am going to be the moderator presenting on the site of Excite. Next slide, please. For those of you that may not know a lot about Cooperative Extension or may not even be aware of Cooperative Extension or Excite, I just want to give you a little bit of an overview. Basically, our mission in a nutshell for Cooperative Extension is to empower through education. We're kind of the bridge between land grant universities and the individuals and communities and businesses who can take that information from those land grant universities and put it into practice to improve their lives. Some of the key aspects of Cooperative Extension: one, we are research-based, but community-focused. Our goal is to improve the quality of life for all of our constituents. We do work within the realm of economic development, environmental stewardship, youth development, and we do utilize partners. That's one of the ways that we can increase our reach is through our partnerships. Something that if you are familiar with Cooperative Extension that you may not be familiar with is our Excite program, which is the Extension Collaborative on Immunization, Teaching, and Engagement. It's basically the USDA, National Food Institute for Food and Agriculture, and the CDC funded initiative that addresses health disparities among rural and other underserved communities. Under this Excite umbrella, we have our H5N1 work group. Next slide. And you can see I put up a little bit of information on what we have to offer. We do have a website that kind of gives in a nutshell everything that we are about and all the services that we provide. Resources in Spanish and in English, as also a number of fact sheets and our partner groups, any information, relevant information that they may have. On that website, you can also find links. We have monthly spotlight meetings that we bring in speakers and highlight topics. So if you're interested in learning more about what Excite has to offer along the lines of H5N1, if you just visit our website. Next. We are very fortunate today to have some exceptional speakers and opportunities to learn today from them as well as from each other. A little bit of information on our speakers, and then we're going to turn it over to probably what everybody is wanting to hear from. We've got Dr. John Gibbons. who is a veterinary advisor for NIOSH, and he's going to give us an overview of the current situation of high-path AI in the U.S., and a little bit about the CDC's role. Then we've also got Jason Hartshoe, who is on our H5N1 kind of work group. He's from OSU. He's a field specialist in dairy management and precision livestock, and he's going to talk a little bit about OSU Extension programs and on-farm work. And then we have Mr. Roberto Rosales from NC State Extension. He's with the Farmworker Health and Safety Educator, and he's the program coordinator there. I guess, next slide. Just the basic overview of our learning objectives. One is just to describe recent updates of the H5N1 and general human and animal health implications. Then we'd like to identify needs of constituents, farm workers, and how to create effective partnerships. And then finally, to spotlight challenges and solutions experienced by key extension personnel and partners. Next. None of this with either one of us would be possible without the help from the CDC. The CDC is a great supporter of Excite, as well as the National Center for Farmworker Health. And I think after this slide, we will turn it over to Dr. Gibbons for his presentation.
Okay, well, thank you very much, and good morning, good afternoon. Thank you to the organizers for giving me the opportunity to share a little bit of information today with you. So next slide, please. So we've all spent a lot of time in the last year on high-path AI, especially H5N1 strain, but this is not a new virus. This was first recognized in China in 1996. And there were a number of human and animal cases really throughout Asia and Europe in the mid 2000s. And then in the end of 2021 in the US, we saw this specific clade that we're dealing with now. This specific type of virus was detected in wild birds. And then this led to outbreaks in 2022 in commercial and backyard poultry. And I should mention in 2014 and 2015, the poultry and turkey industry dealt with this also. And so not a new situation in poultry, but in March of 2024, so a little over a year ago, this was detected in dairy cattle for the first time in the United States. And then the first human case associated with dairy exposure was in April of 2024. So next slide, please. So CDC's really their main priorities in addressing this situation is to support and engage with our partners, both on the public health and the agriculture side, worker advocacy groups like National Center for Farmworker Health, to reach workers. You know, here at the federal level, it's hard for us to reach workers where they're at in the field. Second goal is to protect human health and safety, both for workers as well as the general public. You know, there are always concerns about influenza viruses changing and becoming more infectious and more virulent to both people and animals. So the public health and the occupational health components are both important. Really understanding the risk of this virus, you know, the fact that this virus is being transmitted by milk, raw milk, and cattle is a new finding. And so we still have a lot more to learn about sources of exposure there. And then we're always at CDC assessing the virus for changes, for development of resistance to antivirals, things of that nature. So that's really the four main thrusts that CDC has with this virus. So next slide, please. So as of April of this year, there have been a little over 1,000 farms affected across 17 states in the United States. And within the last 30 days, there have been 4 states affected, around 30 farms. So we have seen a slowdown in number of infections. And I think we're much more confident in that data now than we were early on because there's bulk tank testing, there's testing at processing centers, there's much more testing going on now than there was when this situation initially started. So was initially recognized in early 2024 that dairy cattle were having a syndrome of illness that really hadn't been recognized before. They weren't becoming violently ill or dying like we see in poultry, but there were decreases in milk production. The milk was not normal, and feed consumption decreased and things like that. And along this time, veterinarians noticed that some bird die-offs were on these farms as well as die-offs of barn cats. And so some testing was done. And so really in March of 2024, as we see, there was the first confirmed cases in cows in Texas and Kansas. So next slide, please. So the situation in poultry and other species since February of 2022, when this was seen in poultry, is around 781 commercial flocks, 907 backyard flocks of birds, and primarily layers and turkeys. Over 168 million birds have either died or been destroyed because of this virus. And as we've seen, it's been seen in a wide variety of wild birds and wild mammals, to include marine mammals, bears, cats. The list of animals not seen is probably shorter than the list that has been seen at this point. So that complicates control, obviously, because wildlife are present on these farms and can be a source of infection. Next slide, please. So as far as human cases go, since this started in 2024, there have been a total of 70 human cases have been identified, 41 of those in dairy cattle, and 24 of those in people working on poultry farms and primarily working in culling operations, or killing of the birds and cleaning up of the birds that have died. And you can see the states that have been affected there to this point. So this was on the kind of the occupational side. So next slide. And so this shows kind of the slide of three cases really were of unknown exposure. Really, we weren't able to figure out where the people were exposed. A case in Missouri and a couple of children in California. Really, the trace back in the investigation really didn't identify where they could have been exposed at. And then we saw two cases related to backyard flocks. A patient in Louisiana who unfortunately died, and then a patient from Wyoming who was hospitalized and subsequently recovered. So, an important key here is that we've seen no transmission from person to person in the United States. And so that's where that surveillance of monitoring the virus for changes is important. The next slide, please. So this is kind of two types of human monitoring that's gone on. The first, at the top, the National Flu Surveillance, CDC and their state and local health department partners do flu surveillance, every year, essentially looking for what strains of flu what is being transmitted across the country. And so, over close to 180,000 specimens were tested as part of this routine surveillance that would have identified H5 viruses if it were there. And so 6 of the cases I previously mentioned were picked up through this national surveillance. And then at the bottom, additional surveillance was done targeting H5 once this disease was seen in cattle. And so the other 64 cases were detected through this, and primarily this exposure testing was done due to exposure to animals, primarily through workers. Next slide, please. So this is some of the outreach that CDC has done. We've done a lot of work with the National Center for Farmworker Health. We did a lot of work with them during COVID as far as worker education and outreach. NIOSH funds 4 centers of agriculture, safety, and health. They receive some supplemental funding to do some training around the country. There are initiatives to improve seasonal flu vaccination for workers. We don't want workers or anyone really infected with multiple strains of influenza at the same time, because that increases the chances of new viruses being formed. So that's an important initiative. And then done our best to improve surveillance and improve testing availability for workers that may not have access to medical care. So next slide, please. So some of that outreach, this is really CDC did the most in my experience in 19 years there, as far as social media outreach, trying to reach workers in media and in formats where they may be listening. So this could be digital media, radio stations, things of that nature. Next slide, please. So worker protection is, being at NIOSH is the area I was primarily involved in, and we do see this virus in high levels of milk. And so, PPE is focused on as a control measure, and it's an important control measure, but there are other control measures too. We have materials to allow employers to do risk assessments. I mentioned that this has only been seen in 4 states in the past 30 days. So whether the virus is in your area or not is an important hazard assessment to then drive what administrative as well as PPE controls are needed. And so we've tried to make these communication materials available in languages that we know workers speak. Next slide, please. So this information is off our website and just shows some of the PPE recommendations that are out there. And I know this is challenging. Before I worked for the government, I was a practicing veterinarian, mixed animal practice. Give a shout out to extension agents. They were very helpful when I was in private practice. And we know there are challenges with this. And so that's where that hazard assessment is really important, to see if this level of PPE is really needed. The next slide, please. So we recommend when people are working with animals that they monitor themselves for symptoms, and some of the symptoms are listed there. They're pretty non-specific, especially this time of year with people battling allergies in certain parts of the country. It can be challenging. Conjunctivitis is one of the things that we've seen that's not been seen in other parts of the world with these viruses in the past. Next slide, please. And so, of course, if people develop symptoms that we're concerned about, we encourage them to seek medical evaluation, be it through a local health department, be it through a healthcare center, things of that nature, and ideally isolate themselves if possible. That can be difficult, I know, because cows have to be milked, but taking as good a precautions as possible is important. So next slide, please. These are just a pictograph of some of the symptoms. We can go on to the next slide. And this is how testing is done. Typically, testing of workers would be done by taking swabs of the nose, throat, or the eye to be collected and tested. Antivirals can be made available while test results are being waited on to get results. And again, isolation is ideal if possible, until infection is ruled out. So next slide, please. So kind of our takeaway message is the overall risk to the general public remains low, but there is increased risk with certain occupations and recreational exposures, people who hunt birds, things of that nature. And CDC will continue to support our partners as best we can and monitor for changes to this virus. Next slide. And so, kind of future directions, USDA is spending a lot of money looking at improving biosecurity on farms that protects both farm animals and farm workers, vaccine development, things of that nature. And so this will be with us for a while. This is not going away anytime soon. It changes based on the environmental conditions of the virus, the migratory bird patterns, things of that nature. But, a lot of work is still ongoing in trying to develop methods to control and hopefully someday eliminate this. So with that, I thank you for your time and attention, and can answer questions at the end. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Gibbons. I know with this H5N1 and the number of cases and the widespread across the country that you all that are kept very busy, and we appreciate your time and your willingness to come speak to us. Next, we're going to turn it over to Jason Hartshoe from Ohio State University Extension. He's going to talk a little bit about the OSU Extension on-farm work and work with farmers and partnerships.
All right. Thanks, Tina. And thank you, John, for that nice covering of H5N1 and some of the resources CDC has available for farmers. So I'm going to be going over some of kind of building that farm partnership as we think through how do we better work with our ag communities? How do we better work with our farmers? And what are those different types of partnerships that we can be involved in? And I kind of get to give this a unique approach, as not only do I work for Ohio State University Extension as an extension field specialist working with dairy farmers across the state, I also get to see some of these different types of interactions from the other side, from the farmer's perspective, as I work with my own family and see how they respond to different things. When people want to partner on their farm, they run a diversified crop and dairy operation, and you get to see how those partnerships work. But when we think through types of farm partnerships, they can kind of be categorized as we go down this list. And a lot of times if we want to start with a farm, we start with that public relations visit where we just come and learn more about that farm operation, learn about the things they need and what's going on that farm. But that's not always the place that it starts. Once you build that reputation in a region, sometimes that public relations or foot in the door visit gets skipped, and you come in somewhere on down this list. For me, it often is I come in on a consultation visit and then build from there, where I've built a reputation in the state of some different programming we do to help farmers with worker training or building design, ventilation, help them solve a problem on their farm. And they call us in to do a consultation on that farm. And it's kind of like that public relations and consultation visit, where we get to know more about that farm, but we also provide a service back to them. And that's been a great way, once we have a reputation, to continue to build farms across the state that then we can go down and do other activities and more farm partnerships with, such as those worker trainings. A lot of times they want to know who we are and better understand the services that we can provide and the people that we are, to understand, that context we're going to bring to a training that we might do on their farm. And then different people from our extension team may actually go on farm and offer trainings in various languages, such as on the dairy side, offer trainings to feeders on how to properly mix feed for the livestock, or in a dairy farm parlor setting, doing some of the parlor training on how to milk cows safely, and the importance of doing it correctly to maximize milk quality. And then we may do some different interactions with that farm, such as demonstrations, field days, survey collection, or field research, which is going a little bit deeper into that partnership, where maybe we have a field day or a demonstration where we set up two different things on farm, and we let the farmer see how a new idea is going to work on that farm and let them try something new, as seeing is often believing, which kind of goes along with field research, where we actually partner with farms and they let us come on farm and do a research trial in a crop production setting. That's going to be, testing a different seeding rate, testing a different fertilizer on farm, and seeing if that improves their farm profitability. Or maybe in the dairy world, trying a different treatment protocol for dry treatment, such as not dry treating all the cows and utilizing a protocol where at dry off, when that cow stops milking, we don't treat the cow. Instead, she dries off naturally with no antibiotic usage. Or when we get into workers, providing them with some different personal protective equipment, seeing how that works with them, and some different survey collection that can be done with those farm workers to learn more about what they do on farm, what's provided for worker protection, what's needed, and what's really going on that farm. Next slide, please. So as we build those farm partnerships, there's some things we need to think about. A lot of times we forget that these farm owners, they really do care about their employees first and foremost, their livestock and their crops. Sometimes we feel like they care more about their livestock or their crops, but the reality is, on most farms, they need their employees more than the employee needs them. And these farms know that. It's just at the end of the day, we can't mistake the fact that they get really focused in on economics and efficiencies because many of them have a multi-million-dollar operating loan on the line every year as they go out, put out a crop, or they uh, buy all their inputs for their livestock operation and raise those livestock until market. They incur those expenses, and a lot of times those go on an operating loan. And at the end of the year, when they sell that crop, they plan to be able to pay that back. But due to weather events and many unforeseen situations, maybe that doesn't always happen. So they have a lot of risk in the game that causes them to always be thinking about and talking about economics and efficiencies, even though in the back of their mind, they really are concerned about those employees, livestock, and crops and what's going on with those people on the farm. Another thing to keep in mind is most farmers respect your professional title, but it goes back to that saying, they don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. It goes back to doing that first visit and making contact with these farms, learning about their values and sharing how you have similar values, care about those employees and want to make their lives better, and that you really do care about their operation. And then they'll start to open up and let you share what you know and show how you can actually help improve their operation. But getting to know them and what their needs are first before we come in and start offering solutions to problems that they might not even feel they have is very beneficial. And then when it comes to doing research, research is a great tool, but it's important for us to remember that we really need to know these farms and understand and be a partner on the farms before we go out and make a request to do research with them. And we think through those research protocols, make sure we keep them easy, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in future slides. Next slide, please. Care and follow through are critical. When we go out to a farm and we ask them, or we have that discussion with them about some of their needs, make sure we follow up and bring those resources to help with their needs back to them in a timely fashion. Now, on a farm, a timely fashion isn't 6 months later. It's a couple weeks later, getting things back to them, making sure you know that they care. Most farmers have a good relationship with the USDA branch of the government. There's a few that don't, and for various reasons, maybe very confrontational towards USDA, especially some of their wetland policies and things that have upset some farmers over the years. But most of them respect the USDA portion of the government, but sometimes they feel very misunderstood and forgotten by the government. And I think, one way to really bring that home is down here in these two pictures. So 2 years ago in my area of the state, we had two different tornadoes about a month apart. The first one went through the rural area and has this picture over here on the right of a set of grain bins that are catastrophically damaged. And those catastrophically damaged grain bins, along with that, there was 3 other barns that were catastrophically damaged. And the local community in that rural area, so a few neighbors came together and kind of helped clean things up a little bit. But then those farms were really left on their own to figure out how to clean up the mess, how to move on, and what to do. But over here on the left, it actually doesn't look quite as bad, but you can see a fire truck there in the background. In that picture in town, where the tornado went through town, it damaged some businesses in town, it damaged some homes. And in that more populated area, it's still a rural area, but in that more populated rural area, they were opened up to economic assistance through disaster loans. And those disaster loans were to help keep employees paid, help repair their buildings for low interest loans. But that wasn't available to those 3 farms that were damaged. It was never declared a disaster, even though it could be proved it was a tornado, because those declarations were never made. They were never opened up to the same economic disaster assistance. And those producers felt, kind of left behind and forgotten about because they weren't offered those same programs as they figured out how to rebuild, and ended up using interest loans that maybe were twice as high as what would have been available if they were offered those assistance and disaster loans. Next slide. So building a farm partnership, when we start thinking about research, if we want to go on farm and do a research project, whether it's working with that farmer on changing a production practice with their livestock or their crops, or doing something different with their employees. First and foremost, we have to develop a reputation of returning results. A lot of times, if you think about research, you think about a multi-year study. It's really critical with farm producers that are changing things every year to try to be more economical and efficient, that we return those results. Even if we don't want them to change their practices, we want to show them the results that we got. So if we do a survey and it's going to take us 3 years to get that survey published, we want to return those individual farm results within the first year so they can see what their farm looked like, maybe benchmarked and compared to another farm, even before we get all that data figured out and written up in a research paper. If we're doing an on-farm project, make sure our research questions match farm challenges, even in surveys. Make sure there's something in that survey that's going to benefit the farmer and going to answer a question that they have. If we're doing that on-farm practice with crops or livestock, allow those farmers to add treatments or add a question to your survey. If you're surveying their employees, what's a question that they have? Maybe you have to anonymize that a little bit more, or pull in some things from multiple farms so they don't know exactly how their employees answered it. But let them know that, we can change and modify that survey a little bit so that they get something back out of it. Keep those studies simple. Farms tend to have a limited amount of time, which is often what makes it hard to start that farm partnership, is they don't have a lot of time to meet with you. So they're busy when you try to come and visit them. They may have something else going on and only have 5 to 10 minutes. Unfortunately, we're finding that even as farms expand and get larger, some of these farm owners, unless it's a really large farm, if they're still involved in all the day-to-day activities, they seem to have even less time as they get larger, as they're trying to fill in for employees. As if employee turnover is high, some of them are doing that employee training, and that just takes up their time, and they don't have as much time to work with us as we come on farm, but they still want to. So how can we meet them where they are and work with them while they're multitasking? And just remember, if we're going to do research on farm, this is their livelihood. If we're doing anything that has to do with the production on the farm, especially, we need to think about how it may decrease that return to their investments in that farm, or how we may be able to improve their livelihood, make things easier for them as they're trying to make that living. Next slide. So when we go to visit the farm, some things to think about. Cold calls are rarely for more than an introduction. So if we want to stop on farm, we want to make that cold call. I often think about, taking your business card with you and just stopping, saying hello, letting them know you're in the area and what you can do, or what you do, and that you'd like to come back and visit with them. As a farmer myself, when I'm working at night after my 9 to 5 job on the farm and somebody stops in and interrupts what I'm trying to do, what that really does is, it delays the things I'm trying to get done that night and delays me getting home, maybe back to the family at home and things that I also want to do. So keeping those short when it's a cold call is not an appointment. Cold calls really can work quite well by phone. If you have access to farmers' phone numbers, keeping that in case people turn over time so we can get a hold of those farmers, making that phone call, leaving them a message, even if it's just a message that you would like to stop out, so that they know who you are when you stop and have an idea of what you want. Those younger clientele, we're finding, it may be just as well to text them. Text them that you'd like to stop out, a little bit about what you want before you come out, so they have an idea of what you're going to want to talk about when you come. And maybe you can even make out a time where you can multitask with them. In the agronomic crops world, when we work with new extension agents, we find that it actually works quite well for them to stop out during planting or harvest, as some of these newer tractors have a buddy seat in them. Now, you kind of need to know which farm you're going to and if that is an option. But if you can ride in that buddy seat and have that discussion while the producer is planting or while that producer is harvesting, that's a way to interact with them, get to know each other, and you're not really interrupting their day because they can continue to do what they would normally be doing. But not all equipment has a buddy seat or will really allow for that. If you think about a forage harvester, even some of those newest ones can be kind of loud in the cab and hard to carry on a conversation. But definitely, how do we have those conversations and not interrupt the farmer's day to let them know who we are and what we may be able to give them? Some other things to keep in mind. I know not all organizations are the greatest about this, as some of them don't either provide a company vehicle or really want logos put on personal vehicles. But be sure your vehicle and yourself, that you're identified with your organization when you show up on farm, so that the farmer knows who you are. When you pull in, if they see your vehicle, and then when you get into that, if you're, walk up to them, if your vehicle's parked somewhere else, have that logo, who you are on your clothing, so that they know who's coming to visit them. They can associate you, especially in Extension. Extension tends to have a really good reputation with farmers. And by having that logo, letting them know that you're from the Cooperative Extension, it kind of gives you immediate trust and credibility on farm. And then you can build from there based on that organizational credibility. But another thing to keep in mind, when visiting farms, make sure you let other people know which farms you're going to be visiting, and just keep other people informed. Farms can be dangerous places, not really so much worried about maybe somebody on that farm intentionally hurting somebody that visits, but there's just a lot of equipment moving around, and you really want to make sure somebody from your organization knows where you are. Next slide. And that really moves into this keep safety in mind. If you haven't been on a lot of farms, when you first pull in on farm, watch for equipment, watch for animals, and really think about where to park. Um, if you make that cold call and you actually talk to the farmer before you go on farm, it's good to ask, where should I park on farm? Just because there's 4 farm vehicles parked somewhere doesn't mean parking at the end of that line of farm vehicles is going to be a safe place. It might be a reason why only 4 vehicles fit there, because the next one in line is in a traffic path. And when when they're coming through, they might not see you. There's a lot of people that get really bad when they're running big equipment. One, you can't always see around, but you just know where things are. And you put that piece of equipment in reverse and you back up, and you don't expect anything to be there. And when something's out of the ordinary, that's how accidents happen. So kind of that, keep your head on a swivel, conduct a safety risk assessment when you walk on farm, see where there's risk, things you need to pay attention to, that heavy equipment moving around. From 2015 to 2019, there were 60,000 farm workers injured, and we don't want one of us to be one of those stats. Most of them knew the risks, knew how to stay safe, but something went wrong. And the same thing can happen if you're riding with that farmer and the corn planter breaks and they get out to go work on it. Maybe you feel like you can provide an asset by getting in there and helping, but if you don't know the hazards of working on that piece of equipment while you're on that farm visit, you could be a risk and a liability. In 2019, there were 573 farm-related fatalities. So just really keep that safety in mind when you make a farm visit. Next slide. Conducting a farm worker training program. When we think about going on farm and doing these training programs, things we think about doing is reviewing all those training materials with the farm owner. Not saying we don't want to introduce new ideas, because that's the reason why we're there. But especially if we're doing a personal protective equipment training, that farm owner wants to keep their workers safe. They want to know what's going to be trained on. But what happens if we introduce a new piece of PPE or a new tool to the workers on that farm that the farm owner knows nothing about? One, they're going to resist a little bit because they might not understand the why, or two, they might not have that resource available for the farm workers, that piece of PPE. So if we introduce it to the farm owners first, make sure they have those resources. Maybe during that training is the first time the workers get introduced to them and they can actually be given them. Make sure if it's a new topic that no one's trained on, that owner really understands the topic, and understand individual farm protocols. So like on dairy farms, our milking procedures, or on vegetable operations, vegetable sorting guidelines tend to vary based on who they're selling to. So making sure when we do that individual training that we can adjust our training to those on-farm protocols. And some other things, which is really comes back to just being able to show our value. Make sure we take in some of those before and after metrics, not only maybe to show our value to our funders, but it also shows value to that farm when they can look and see, oh, this organization came and did a worker training for me, and my milk quality improved due to my parlor training, or my milk production went up after a feeder training, or we have less call vegetables ending up into those sorted vegetables on the packing line after this training program, or we have to spend less time with workers taking, heat stress breaks because we train them on how important drinking water is, are all things that we can show value to get us back on farm. Next slide. Practice biosecurity when we go to these farms. This is biosecurity both for livestock and crop and vegetable farms. There are livestock diseases like the H5N1 that was just presented that can spread between farms and is zoonotic, meaning that it can spread from people to livestock, back to the livestock or the people, and move back and forth. So we want to make sure that we never go on farm with dirty clothes, change clothes between farm visits, and always have plastic boots available for you and any guests you bring on farm. If you do a farm visit or a field day, provide those, especially if there's livestock present, with plastic boots to keep any sort of disease from entering that farm or leaving. And even on vegetable farms, remember that some plant diseases can spread between farms, mostly due to movement of produce. We see that when we host an on-farm disease diagnostics clinic and participants start bringing in all sorts of different vegetable diseases and things. We get concerned about any of that being left behind or not sanitized away, because some of those diseases then could spread to our host farm partner. Next slide. Hosting a field day or other field events, when we invite others to come on, we need to think about what's the risk to those farm hosts. Do we need to have a liability policy for them and us for insurance? Do we need to maybe put up some caution tape or put up some barriers to keep our participants in areas of the farm where equipment isn't operating? Also thinking about restroom facilities. For most farms, maybe they have a restroom, but I highly encourage you to think about, if you're going to host an on-farm event, to get a porta pot instead of asking that farm to provide their restroom that maybe their employees still need to use and come and go from. It just really improves farm flow and your field day to just get those porta pots and spend that money. Have those hand washing stations available so participants can wash hands, especially if they interact with any sort of produce or livestock. And then assist that farm with getting things like tents, seating logistics, and having a plan if it rains. If we're going to have an outside event, what happens if it rains? Do we need a tent? Do we have enough indoor space? What all has to be cleaned up? And just have that liability discussion with the farm. Next slide. After that farm event, it's good to provide that farm with a written report of the training that happened. If it was a worker training, what we trained on, what the workers learned, and any sort of follow-up details. If you host a field day, provide an extra token of appreciation. Besides helping to make sure the farm's cleaned up and returned to how it was before you came, it's usually not a cash payment, just a nice little gift basket of some kind or something to show that farm that you appreciated what they did for you. If you do a public relations visit, make sure you follow up with a phone call or a text, answer any questions. You don't have to know all the answers, but get answers back to these producers when they ask questions to show that resource that you can provide. And then just always close with that question of what else can you do to help them? And that will really improve your opportunities to get to come back on farm. Next slide. I think that was the last one. Yes. So if you have any questions, you can hold those to the end and we'll take those then. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Jason. And we're going to keep moving. Next, we've got Roberto Rosales with NC State Extension. And we will let him take it away, and so we can keep on time.
Awesome. Thank you, Tina, and thank you, Jason. I think you hit a lot of the nails on the head with a lot of the work and slides that I'm going to be presenting on. But so I'll just kind of focus it more on a program model that we do here in North Carolina, and just kind of, I think everything that Jason mentioned is key steps, key points to building that relationship with farmers and farm workers in this, in agriculture. So today I just wanted to talk about our program and kind of what's worked for us. This is a comprehensive outreach model in North Carolina, And so this is an ideal program if you're able to carry out, but a lot of the key points that Jason mentioned are super important. It's what's really driven the success of this program. So, anything, I know there's a lot of organizations and different groups in this call. So, try to take some of that and tailor it to whatever program and outreach that you're doing. But if we can go to the next slide, I just wanted to kind of hit stress a little bit more on what Jason mentioned. I think it's always trying to be relevant to the farms and we work a lot with growers as an organization, but with our program we work a lot with the workers as well, and also the importance of working with agency partners. So a lot of it is just trying to be relevant and making sure that we're able to address some of the key points that that are important to them. So if we just keep clicking, Alexis, one of the ways that I like to look at it, a lot of the time, like Jason mentioned, we're not. It's not that they don't care about their workers. There's just a lot going on a farm operation. So time and money are going to be at the at the top, along with employee care. But at the same time, depending on what kind of work you're doing, this also is relevant to when you're working with workers. If you're doing some kind of programming outside of the farm work hours or in their downtime, they're also thinking about the same thing. They're looking, how much is going to affect the time that I'm investing, is how it's going to affect how much money I'm making. And that's where we see a lot of that, low participation or no participation. So a lot of that is how do we address some of these challenges, and a lot of the things that were covered in the previous presentation kind of hit on that nail. So if we go to the next slide, I'll just want to talk about our program here in North Carolina. This is a educational program where we have educators working directly with the counties or in a regional setting. Those highlighted counties are where our program is actively operating in. So we have people providing education on different health and safety topics. The the reason it was not covered throughout the whole state just because of this is a grant funded position, and these are kind of our like hotspots of, where we have heavy farm operations with labor needs. So this is kind of our targeted area. But if we get calls from growers in other counties, then we'll address those. And that's where that partnership is important, because we'll get some of these calls, not necessarily just from our extension office, but our NCD, our Department of Ag offices, or USDA, some of those county offices, and even partners that work with workers and farms. So if we go to the next slide, just gonna and we can kind of click through all of these, but when this program was created, really what we wanted to do was look at some of the objectives that could kind of guide this program. And this is before I came to work with this program. So, one of the key thing was to improve that communications among the different groups on the farm. So if you're familiar with, any farm operation, they're not any one farm is the same. There's a lot of different groups, people, characters. So it's important to build those relationships with the different groups, and obviously there'll be different ways and different things that you'll need to connect with those groups. But in the end of the day, is how do we bring those communications all together? Another key objective was providing health and safety training. We wanted to also be a resource for growers here in North Carolina. There's so many, like we mentioned before, there's a lot of challenges on farms. They're not just thinking about their, their workers' well-being, but they're also thinking about their livestock well-being, their families, things that are happening with policies that affect their operations, the community that they're operating in. So there's just a lot of things that they need to consider, all at the same time. So just being a resource for that. So if we, again, this is part of building that relationship. If there's something that we can't provide, it's important for us to be a facilitator and be connected with, whatever resource they might be looking for. We also want to promote, organizations that provide services to work together. I think sometimes it can be a territory kind of thing, and we're looking for numbers, and it's challenging, but it's really important, I think, to collaborate together and try to find ways that we can work together and be more efficient in that sense. Because there might be a time where a farm needs, he has a worker, maybe he hasn't been working for a week or two and need some kind of support. That's where some of these organizations that might be helping, people with some of these needs can help out and right, and that makes that connection with the farmer that, okay, well, if I'm not able to offer something, there's groups there that can support in some kind of way, right? Doesn't always have to be financial. And then we also want to connect workers and families with extension resources. As Tina mentioned earlier, extension does a lot of other education and other topics around youth leadership, and every state's a little bit different, but just connecting families with different resources that extension has in their state or in their county. And then at the time when this was put together, one of our big objectives was to bring EPA Worker Protection Center, which is a lot of around pesticide safety and good agricultural practices onto the farm. So just essentially helping farms meet some of those training needs. So if we can go to the next slide. So we have a couple components that we kind of go through, and it just kind of guides us a little bit more. So, a worker training is one of our top ones. Farm labor contractor workshops, and it might not be the same in other states, but in North Carolina, we don't require farm labor contractors to go through an educational program or test. So this is kind of our way of providing some kind of educational resource to farm labor contractors. So here in North Carolina, we have a, a lot of contractors working with multiple farms, so they'll need some of that educational component as well. Community educational events, we work with a lot of farms to provide this. Community partner coalitions, which is again working with groups to bring them together and be able to address um, any situation that might arise. So COVID was a great example of how organizations came together here in North Carolina. We already mentioned extension cross programming, and then we had a COVID as one of our top components just because of the amount of education and outreach that was needed for that. So if we go to the next slide, one of the things that we'll see is I'll just kind of go through these components, just go really quickly with some of the images. I wanted to show some of these trainings. If we look back at the time and money, these are some trainings that farms need to be offering either through regulatory requirements, from state or federal. The EPA Worker Protection Standard is one of the big ones. But then also they might be needed for any industry or commodity requirements. So meeting any uh, good agricultural practice or some kind of certification, third-party certification programs. So this is, a way to address that and help farms. As Jason mentioned, they have a lot going on, and if they're providing all these trainings and education, it can, tie them down to how much time and stress that they have. So by us coming on and providing this training on the farm just alleviates a lot of that, and they're able to, you know, if there is an issue, they're like, well, this third party group provided this training. So it is a way to, and it also creates an elevated experience for the workers, making sure that they have the knowledge and a lot of it's hands-on, engaging trainings, which is what we want, right? We don't want just to check a box. We want to make sure that people are able to implement some of these things into their daily work and tying it back into making sure that the farmer's involved in all of this. So a lot of this is coordination with the employer of the farm workers. So if we go to the next slide, So that's on farm. This is at our extension center. So, we do a lot of these, through our program, but in some cases we do work with other organizations that are doing training as well. So again, there's a lot of work to do around farm safety. So it's important for us to work with other universities, other organizations doing this, so that we can, meet that demand and work that they need. Next slide. So this is just kind of what we cover. So I won't go into this, but just to give an example of the different topics we might be covering, in a 90-minute training session. And this is, every training is a little bit tailored depending on the farm needs. So again, just being relevant. If a farm here we have a green tobacco illness and guava root knot nematode training, these are specific to a tobacco and a sweet potato farm. But if we go to a blueberry farm, then those are things that we might leave out. So, not just because we have it, we need to lay that onto the farm, really trying to be mindful of their time and working with what they actually need to meet these training needs. And we had COVID in here, especially during, the pandemic. So if we go to the next slide. And so again, I won't touch on this too much because I already mentioned it, but essentially, a lot of this helps the farm meet whatever training, for training records. Farms need to keep so many records on pesticide application, trainings, different ways that they're, working on their land. So there's just a lot of these record keeping that needs to happen. So this is one of the things that we provide and help farms, meet this if they need to when they need to document this. Next slide. And then just kind of to wrap it up with farm safety training, there's also an area that we're kind of trying to build on is these pesticide applicator schools. In North Carolina, we have the English pesticide applicator schools, but we don't have the Spanish option, and we have a lot of Spanish-speaking workers that are doing these applications. So again, this is again another way to meet that relevant need that there's a lot of farms that needed workers to be certified to apply certain pesticides. So this is kind of helping meet that demand. Again, getting to know your farm in that sense. Next slide. And I'll just kind of go through these next pictures, but this is kind of like the different work that happened here in North Carolina. We had we have a big labor provider that brings in probably 75% of the labor force. And so we collaborated with them to get some of this education right when the pandemic happened. And on the bottom right, we see some farm worker appreciation days that we held. Again, this is just to kind of help farms provide a space for their workers to feel welcome, during their time in North Carolina. Next slide. This is what our farm labor contractor workshops, look like. A lot of it's, coordinating the space and the event, providing meals, and then bringing in state agencies, regulatory agencies, or whatever group that might provide something beneficial for their operation, especially if they're working with multiple farms. Next slide. So this is again cross-program extension. A lot of our agents are, great and specialize in a lot of the production and growing techniques and research and those kinds of things. But how do we get our extension staff to, collaborate and work with, some of the other parts of the farm operation? So one of the things that was important for us with this program was to work with a lot of our agents to bring some of these programs. And one of the ways that this helped out a lot was during the pandemic, when we needed to provide a lot of PPE and disinfectant stuff to the community. So this was a key component for the program. The next two slides, what I'll talk about is just some tools that kind of happened that tie into Excite. This was kind of like a multi-year operation where, we started with just, this little flip chart that, talked about the basics, wearing masks, washing their hands. And then we put out a video for farms to share with their workers as right when the pandemic started, we couldn't do any of that for obvious reasons. But that kind of later developed into a flip chart that once we realized a lot of farms were having workers come and little or no information was provided, on the farm. We wanted to make sure that we were able to be able to provide that when the time was right. So this is probably like a year and a half later, making sure that we were providing some of that information with the flip chart, which later led into some vaccine education videos. And all of this was, due to the support and funding through the Excite Foundation, Extension Foundation through the Excite project. If we go to the next slide. And one other project that was really really exciting was the Promotores model, which is basically like a community health worker, lay worker, where they go out into the community. So where our traditional program was focused on going in and working directly with farm operations on farm safety needs. We wanted to make sure that the community also had this knowledge and so we were able to put together this promotoras model, which was focused on going to other events and going into the communities, typically the ag neighborhoods, places that we know people that worked in agriculture were, coming to stores, those kinds of things. So very your traditional outreach, being out in the community and being present. So that's just a picture of our team that we were able to bring into our high harvest and peak season during the year. Next slide. So I won't harp on this because we've already talked about this, but it's really just bringing on all these different groups that work with, the employers, that work with labor providers, that work with farm workers. There's just so many opportunities and making sure that everybody's on the same page. So that's why those coalitions and partnerships are important. Because, if you don't have an answer or you don't have the resource, you can reach out to that organization or group. And at least in North Carolina, I feel like that's worked really well. Especially after the pandemic, a lot of people started talking and interacting that typically hadn't in the past. So, when things come up and even now with the H5N1, we haven't had major challenges with that yet, but right, the information is getting out there through different outlets because again, workers, growers, they're gonna listen to different people that they trust. So making sure that the people that are providing this information and education are on the same page. Next slide. I just wanted to touch this in, and NCFH has this on their webpage, but I really like it. This model is called Total Worker Health, and they have a podcast where they have different growers that talk about this model and the importance of, bringing all these types of information and programming and resources to the workers and how that translates into being a more effective and well-rounded farm operation. You can listen that on your own time, but wanted to share and stress how this is, a model that can be relevant and help the farms, elevate their farm operations. And then the last slide really is a lot of this, all of this is just the win-win. So if we look back, if we're able to address some of that time, some of that, those money concerns that, workers or farmers might have, over time, you build that trust and that just exponentially, that just kind of translates over into long-term partnership and relationship, to making sure that you're able to provide something that's relevant, to the people that you're working with. So, with that, I think that's my last slide. But our contact information is on this slide, and I'll pass it over back to Tina to take us into the next section of this presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Again, we're gonna keep moving. But thank you, Roberto, for just some really good information. Thank you to all of our speakers. I think if we go to the next slide.